Max had always been a creature of habit. Every morning, without fail, as the sun began to rise and paint the sky with soft shades of pink and orange, he would appear. The neighborhood, nestled in a quiet suburban town, was still sleepy at that hour. The streets were empty, save for the occasional jogger or early commuter heading to work. But on this particular corner, a German shepherd named Max took his place with a quiet, unwavering purpose. The corner was nothing special, just another intersection, with a storm drain on the curbside. It wasn't much to look at, a weathered metal grate covering a dark tunnel beneath the street. Most people probably didn't even notice it as they walked by, but Max seemed to find it utterly fascinating. Each day, he would arrive at the same time, sit at the corner, and fix his gaze intently on the drain. His eyes, golden and intense, never wavered from the small patch of earth surrounding the drain. At first, the neighbors thought little of it. Dogs often had their quirks, didn't they? Maybe it was a habit, a harmless bit of canine behavior. They would watch him from their windows, but no one thought it was worth investigating. After all, it was just a dog sitting by a drain. Who could blame him for being curious? But as the days went on, and then the weeks, Max's routine never changed. Each morning, he would arrive, promptly at 6:30 a.m., sharp, and position himself in front of the drain, as if he were on some kind of mission. No amount of rain or cold could break his commitment. Mrs. Harris, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, was one of the first to take notice. "That dog has been out there every morning without fail," she murmured to her husband one morning over breakfast, glancing out the window. Her sharp eyes had noticed something more than just the dog's odd routine. Max was always alone. There was never a person with him, no one to walk him, no leash in sight. It was just him and the drain. As the days passed, Mrs. Harris grew more concerned. She had never seen Max's owner, and though the dog seemed well-fed and healthy, there was something unsettling about the fact that he spent so much time staring at something so insignificant. Was it just a strange quirk, or was there something more? Perhaps, she thought, Max had a reason for being there that no one had yet understood. The other neighbors began to notice as well. Young Tommy, who walked to school each morning, would often pause by the drain, looking at Max curiously as the dog stared ahead. "What's he doing?" he would ask his mother, but she only shrugged, unsure of the answer. Over time, the entire block began to whisper about Max. Some wondered if he was sick or injured, and if the drain was his way of seeking comfort. Others speculated that he was just lonely, staring at the drain as if waiting for something or someone. But there was one thing no one could deny. Max was absolutely fixated on that storm drain. It was as if the drain itself had cast some strange spell on him. And as the days turned into weeks, the once innocent habit began to take on an air of mystery. What was the German shepherd waiting for? What was so compelling about that storm drain that he could not pull himself away? The neighborhood's collective curiosity had grown into something much more than a passing fascination. Max's routine had become a puzzle, one that no one seemed able to solve. Little did they know, the answer was just beneath their feet, waiting to be discovered. The rumors started to spread. What had begun as a quiet curiosity about Max's strange habit soon became the talk of the neighborhood. Every morning, just as the first light of day bathed the streets in a soft glow, the dog could be seen, stationary, unblinking, staring at the storm drain as if it held the answers to questions only he could understand. Mrs. Harris, still intrigued and a little concerned, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had noticed Max's eyes growing more intense, his focus sharper than ever before. "It's like he's guarding something," she told her husband, adjusting her thick glasses as she peered out the kitchen window. "But guarding what? That old drain. It doesn't make sense." Her husband, a man of few words, simply nodded. He didn't share her concern, believing Max's behavior to be nothing more than a dog's quirky obsession. But Mrs. Harris couldn't let go of the thought. She'd watched dogs for years, and this behavior wasn't normal. A dog's routine might be predictable, but not like this. Not with such purpose, such unwavering commitment. It was almost as if the drain itself held a secret, one that only Max knew. As days turned into weeks, others began to take notice as well. Tommy, the curious young boy who lived 2 houses down, would often pause as he walked past the corner on his way to school. He had tried to coax Max into playing fetch a few times, but the dog would hardly acknowledge him, too absorbed in his silent vigil. "What is he looking at?" Tommy asked his mother one day as he stood staring at Max. His mother, a busy woman who had never had the time to wonder about the dog's behavior, finally stopped and observed for herself. Max's behavior was strange, but in a world full of unanswered questions, she didn't see the harm in letting it be. Still, there was something nagging at her. "Maybe he's waiting for something," she said half-heartedly, unsure if she believed it herself. Across the street, Mr. Thompson, the local handyman, had his own theory. "It's probably just a rat down there, or maybe something shiny," he suggested to the group of neighbors who'd gathered around one evening, all of them watching Max from their porches as if he were a rare bird in a cage. Dogs are funny like that. They'll stare at anything that catches their eye. But Mrs. Harris wasn't convinced. "No," she said with conviction. "It's not just a rat or something shiny. There's something more." A chill ran through her as she remembered something from her youth. In her small hometown, she'd heard stories of stray animals that would return to a spot day after day, waiting for something. It was said that they could sense things, feel things that humans couldn't understand. Maybe Max was waiting for someone. Maybe he was guarding something. Whatever it was, the thought of it gnawed at her. Tommy's older sister, Sarah, a teenager with a keen sense of curiosity, had taken a particular interest in Max. One afternoon, as she walked home from school, she saw him again, his eyes locked onto the drain as if in a trance. She had seen the dog there so often now that she had come to expect it. But today, something was different. Today, Max seemed even more intense, more focused, like something important was about to happen. "Maybe we should check the drain," she thought. "It can't hurt to take a look." As evening fell and the streetlights flickered on, the neighborhood buzzed with conversation about Max and the drain. More and more people had started to take notice, but no one had dared to investigate, to open the drain and see what lay hidden beneath the surface. After all, what could be down there? The mystery of it all was becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. The only certainty was that Max had been there every day, watching. He wasn't just staring, he was waiting. But waiting for what? The neighbors didn't know, but something told them they were about to find out. As the days turned into weeks, the mystery surrounding Max's behavior only deepened. More and more neighbors began to observe the dog's strange obsession, and their curiosity grew with each passing day. Every morning, without fail, Max would appear at the same time, positioning himself directly in front of the storm drain, his body tense, eyes unwavering. He had become a fixture on that corner, almost as if he were guarding it, waiting for something to happen. Mrs. Harris, still deeply concerned, had taken to sitting on her porch with a cup of tea every morning, her eyes fixed on Max. She would watch him for hours, wondering what was going through his mind. She had even tried calling the local animal shelter to ask if there was any unusual behavior reported with stray dogs, but they had assured her that Max was fine. He wasn't sick, and there were no signs of injury. But the more Mrs. Harris observed him, the more she was convinced there was something deeply wrong. She could sense it. One afternoon, as Max lay next to the drain, his nose just inches away from the metal grate, Sarah, Tommy's older sister, decided she couldn't take it anymore. She had been watching Max's behavior for days now, and there was something unsettling about the way the dog seemed to stare into the drain, as though there was something hidden there. "I have to know what's down there," she muttered to herself, more determined than ever. She was the kind of person who couldn't ignore a mystery. She approached Max cautiously, not wanting to startle him. But as she got closer, she noticed something odd. Max wasn't moving. He wasn't even wagging his tail. His focus was entirely on the drain, his eyes narrowed in concentration. There was no bark, no usual excitement that Sarah had come to expect when a dog was near someone. It was as if Max was waiting for something, or someone, to make the next move. Sarah kneeled down beside him, gently placing a hand on his back. "Hey, Max," she whispered, but the dog didn't flinch. He simply continued to stare ahead, his gaze locked onto the drain. Sarah's heart began to race. She had never seen Max so still, so utterly absorbed. Something about it felt wrong. As if responding to her presence, Max suddenly let out a low, almost imperceptible whine. It wasn't a bark of excitement, nor the usual sound of a dog seeking attention. It was a soft, mournful whimper. Sarah's stomach tightened. She had heard dogs cry before, but this was different. It was as if Max were in distress, as if he were trying to communicate something. But what? Why was he so focused on this one spot? Tommy, who had been riding his bike nearby, noticed Sarah kneeling beside Max and pedaled over. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice tense. "But something's definitely going on. I think we need to figure out what's in that drain." Together, they stood up and looked down at the metal grate. It looked like any other drain, old, rusted, and worn by years of use. Nothing about it seemed out of the ordinary, yet the more they stared at it, the more it seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, as if it held a secret just beneath the surface. "I don't like this," Tommy muttered, glancing nervously at Max, who had now stood up and was pacing back and forth, his eyes still fixed on the drain. It was clear to both of them now. Max wasn't just guarding the drain. He was waiting for something. But what was it? The neighbors, watching from their windows and porches, were starting to feel the weight of the situation. Some had grown used to Max's routine, chalking it up to dog behavior. But others were beginning to share Mrs. Harris's unease. What was happening to Max? Why couldn't he leave the drain alone? And why, no matter how many times people walked by or tried to distract him, did he never move? Max's obsessive behavior had become a puzzle no one could solve. It seemed impossible to ignore the growing sense that something was amiss. The dog was no longer just a creature following a routine. He was a sentinel, guarding a spot, waiting for something to happen. And the more time passed, the more urgent it seemed. The question now was, what would happen if they waited too long? As the days wore on, a sense of unease began to settle over the neighborhood. Max's obsession with the storm drain had grown to an almost alarming degree. He no longer simply stared. He paced back and forth, sometimes whining softly, sometimes pawing at the earth around the drain with a frantic energy that was unlike anything the neighbors had ever seen before. There were even moments when Max would lay down beside the drain, his body tense, eyes darting to and fro as if waiting for something to emerge. It was no longer just a quirk. It had become a mystery that no one could ignore. Mrs. Harris, who had been keeping a close eye on the dog since the very first day she noticed his behavior, now found herself unable to shake the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. The deeper she thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fall into place. Max wasn't just staring at the drain. He was guarding it, and he was guarding it for a reason. "I'm telling you," she said one afternoon, speaking to her neighbor, Mr. Thompson, as they watched Max from the comfort of her porch. "That dog is waiting for something. And I think something's down there. Something important." Mr. Thompson, a man who had lived on the block for nearly 40 years, looked over his glasses at the storm drain. He had always been a practical man, someone who believed in the tangible, the real. But now, as he watched Max, who had been sitting still, his eyes fixed on the gray for hours, it was hard to deny the eerie feeling creeping over him. "Well, it's just a drain, right? It's probably just a piece of trash caught in there, or a rat, or something," he said, though his voice lacked the usual confidence. But even as he said the words, he wasn't sure if he believed them. There was something unsettling about the way Max seemed to know something. The dog had been in the neighborhood for years, and never before had he exhibited such odd behavior. Max had always been a gentle, friendly animal, the kind of dog who greeted everyone with a wagging tail. But now he was fixated, consumed by the drain in a way that was impossible to explain. Despite Mr. Thompson's skepticism, Mrs. Harris felt more certain than ever that something was hidden down there, and she wasn't alone in her growing suspicion. Sarah, too, had started to feel an uncomfortable sense of urgency. She had gone past the drain several times now, standing still and watching Max as he continued his silent vigil. Something inside her told her that whatever Max was guarding, it was something she couldn't ignore any longer. "Maybe we should open it," Sarah suggested one afternoon as she watched Max paw at the drain. She had been toying with the idea for days, but each time she thought about it, a small voice in her head told her to leave it alone. The drain was just a part of the street, a necessary but unremarkable feature. So why, then, did it feel like it held such weight? Why did it seem so important? "I think you're right," Mrs. Harris said, her voice low. She had been thinking the same thing for weeks now, and the more she observed Max, the more convinced she became that it was time to uncover the mystery. But we can't do it alone. We need help. It was decided that, together with a few of the other neighbors, they would contact the local maintenance team. They would have the storm drain opened, and once and for all, see what Max had been so fixated on. There was a fear creeping in, one that no one could shake. What if there was something dangerous hidden inside? But the pull to solve the mystery, to finally understand why Max was acting this way, outweighed their growing anxiety. That evening, as the neighborhood gathered on their porches to discuss the plan, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The murmurs of conversation grew louder, and a sense of urgency filled the air. Max, as if sensing the shift in the air around him, stood up from his usual spot and walked toward the drain, his movements slow and deliberate. He glanced over his shoulder at the gathering crowd, then looked back at the drain, as if to say, "It's time." And in that moment, every neighbor understood the weight of what was about to happen. The storm drain had held its secret long enough. It was time to find out what Max had been guarding, and why he had been staring at it for so long. The next morning arrived with a sense of quiet anticipation. The neighborhood had come together, something that rarely happened in the quiet, suburban streets where people kept to themselves. It seemed like everyone who had noticed Max's strange behavior, who had wondered about the drain, had gathered. Mrs. Harris, Sarah, Tommy, Mr. Thompson, and several other neighbors were all present, standing around the storm drain, waiting for the maintenance crew to arrive. Max, as usual, was already there, sitting near the drain. But today there was an unmistakable air of tension around him. He stood vigil, his head low and his eyes fixed on the spot he had been staring at for weeks. His body was taut, almost as if he knew something was about to happen. It was as though he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. As the maintenance crew arrived, a low murmur spread through the crowd. The men got out of the truck, pulling out tools and equipment, all the while casting curious glances at the gathered neighbors and the dog. "What's going on?" one of the workers asked, scratching his head. "We need you to open the drain," Mrs. Harris said, her voice steady but laced with a nervous edge. "There's something strange down there, something the dog has been guarding for weeks." The workers exchanged puzzled looks, but didn't hesitate. They had seen their fair share of strange requests in their time, but they had no idea what was about to unfold. One of the workers bent down, his fingers wrapping around the metal grate, and with a groan, he lifted it. The neighbors collectively held their breath. For a moment, nothing happened. The air was thick with expectation. Max remained still, his eyes locked onto the now exposed opening. The storm drain was deeper than it looked, a dark, gaping hole that seemed to swallow up the light. The workers peered into it, trying to see what was inside. The faint smell of damp earth wafted up, but nothing unusual caught their attention at first. It seemed like an ordinary storm drain, just as they had expected. But then something caught the light, a glint of something shiny, something out of place. The workers bent down further, their faces closer to the edge. "There's something down there," one of them said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something metallic. We'll need a flashlight." Max's ears perked up at the mention of the metallic object. His body tensed, and for the first time since the drain had been opened, he moved. He took a step forward, his head still focused on the opening, his eyes bright with recognition. Sarah, standing a few feet away, looked at Max in awe. She had always wondered why he'd been so obsessed with the drain, but now it was becoming clear. Max knew what was hidden down there. He had been waiting for this moment, for the moment when the drain would be opened. The workers fetched a flashlight, shining it into the dark tunnel below. The beam landed on something strange, a small tarnished box, wedged against the side of the drain. It looked old, covered in dirt and grime, but the metallic surface still gleamed faintly in the flashlight's glow. "What is this?" one of the workers asked, his voice filled with intrigue. Without a word, Max stepped closer, his paws barely making a sound on the ground. He sat down again, his gaze unwavering, as if he were offering his silent approval. It was clear now. This box meant something to him. Mrs. Harris, her heart pounding in her chest, stepped forward. "We have to get it out," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. "There's something inside that Max wants us to see." The workers, a little apprehensive but driven by the strange energy in the air, carefully pulled the box free. It was surprisingly heavy, its edges rough with age. As they held it up, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The atmosphere had shifted, and the neighborhood seemed to be holding its collective breath, waiting for the mystery to finally be revealed. The moment had arrived. Max had waited long enough. The box, now in the hands of the workers, looked even more mysterious up close. It was small, about the size of a shoebox, and covered in dirt and grime, but there was no mistaking the fact that it was something significant. The metallic surface gleamed faintly in the light, and its edges were sharp, as though it had been buried there for years, perhaps even decades. As the workers carefully examined the box, the crowd around them grew quiet. Max, still sitting with his gaze locked on the object, let out a low whine, as if urging them to hurry. It was clear that this box meant more to him than anyone could have anticipated. He had been waiting for this moment, and now that the box was in the open, there was no turning back. Mrs. Harris stepped closer, her heart racing in her chest. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice filled with awe. What could possibly be so important? The workers exchanged uncertain looks. They weren't sure what they were dealing with, but the palpable tension in the air was impossible to ignore. One of the workers, a tall man with graying hair, carefully lifted the box's lid. It creaked with a sound that sent a shiver down everyone's spine. Inside the box was a collection of items, wrapped in tattered cloth. They looked like old relics, coins, pieces of jewelry, and a stack of weathered photographs. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the coins or the trinkets. It was the very first item that the worker pulled out, a small ornate key attached to a tarnished chain. The key gleamed in the sunlight, as though it had been waiting to be discovered for a long time. Max's eyes widened at the sight of the key, and he let out a soft bark, as if to acknowledge the object's significance. The entire crowd, including Sarah and Tommy, stared at the key in disbelief. It was unlike anything any of them had seen before, and its sudden appearance raised more questions than answers. "What do you think this goes to?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible as she stepped closer. Mrs. Harris, her mind racing, glanced over at Max. She had been sure that the dog's strange behavior had been linked to something important, but she hadn't expected this. "I don't know," she replied, her voice shaking. "But it looks like the key to something hidden." The worker holding the key turned it over in his hand, examining it closely. "It looks ancient," he said, his tone filled with wonder. "Where did this come from?" Before anyone could answer, Max stood up. His body language was different now, urgent, almost as if he were impatient. He let out another low bark, this one more insistent, before he began walking toward the nearby woods at the edge of the neighborhood. His eyes never left the key, and he seemed to be guiding them. "Wait," Mrs. Harris called out. "Where's he going?" Without waiting for an answer, Max continued on his path, trotting purposefully toward the trees. It was as if the key had unlocked something in him, some primal instinct to lead the way. Sarah, feeling the same pull, called out to Tommy, "We have to follow him." Without hesitation, the group of neighbors, including the workers, began to follow Max, their footsteps falling in rhythm with the dogs. The tension that had been building in the neighborhood for weeks had now reached a fever pitch. Max, the silent guardian of the drain, was now leading them somewhere. And wherever he was going, it was clear that it had something to do with the key. The mystery that had been quietly unfolding was now on the verge of unraveling, and no one could predict where it would lead. The woods were dense, the trees towering above, their branches interwoven to create a canopy that blocked much of the sunlight. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Max, now leading the way, trotted confidently ahead, his tail held high, as if he knew exactly where he was going. The neighbors followed at a quick pace, trying to keep up with the dog, their footsteps muffled by the soft forest floor. Max had become something of a guide, his behavior more focused than ever before. There was no hesitation in his movements, no confusion. He was on a mission, and they were following him, whether they understood why or not. It felt like they were all drawn into something much larger than they could have imagined. "We're really doing this," Sarah muttered, her eyes darting between Max and the dense trees around them. She had always been the curious one, the one who questioned everything, but even she couldn't deny the strange feeling in the pit of her stomach. It was a mixture of excitement and fear. The key, the box, and now Max leading them deeper into the woods. It was like stepping into a mystery that had been unfolding for years, and they had only just scratched the surface. Tommy, walking a little behind Sarah, was visibly nervous but equally captivated by the unfolding adventure. "I don't know if I should be excited or scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what you mean," Mrs. Harris said from the front of the group, her eyes trained on Max as she hurried to keep up. "But whatever's happening, I feel like we're meant to be here, like this has been waiting for us all along." As they ventured deeper into the woods, the landscape began to change. The trees grew more spaced out, and the undergrowth thinned, revealing a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old stone structure, almost hidden by vines and moss. It was a small weathered stone archway, partially collapsed, but unmistakably ancient. The key that had been discovered earlier seemed to hum with significance, and Max's steps quickened as he approached the archway. The group came to a halt just outside the clearing, a mix of awe and trepidation sweeping over them. The archway was unlike anything any of them had seen. It looked out of place in the woods, like a forgotten relic from another time. The stone was cracked, its surface covered in ivy and moss, and it seemed to have an air of mystery about it, one that felt both inviting and foreboding at the same time. Max, who had slowed down as he neared the archway, turned to face the group. His eyes locked onto them, and for the first time, he seemed to be waiting for them to make the next move. The key in Mrs. Harris' hand suddenly felt heavier, its presence undeniable. "Do you think?" Sarah started, her voice trailing off as she looked at the archway. "Could this be what the key is for?" Mrs. Harris nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "I think so. The key. It must fit here." The group stood still for a moment, contemplating the archway in front of them. The silence was broken only by the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. There was something undeniably powerful about the archway, something that felt ancient, like a gateway to another world, or perhaps a secret long kept hidden. Max seemed to be urging them forward, his body tense and ready. The tension in the air was palpable as Mrs. Harris, trembling slightly, stepped forward, and placed the key into the small rusted keyhole embedded in the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. She hesitated, her breath caught in her throat. But then, with a soft click, the key turned. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble, the air growing heavier as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The archway groaned, and slowly, impossibly, the stone door began to open. The moment the key turned, the world seemed to shift. The stone door of the archway groaned and creaked, its surface shaking, as if something ancient had been disturbed. Max, who had been sitting silently just before, let out a low whine, his eyes wide, as though urging the group to hurry. The neighbors, their hearts racing, stepped closer, feeling the atmosphere grow heavier with every passing second. As the door creaked open fully, a blinding light spilled out from the gap. It wasn't the kind of light that was typical in a forest clearing. It was warm and golden, almost otherworldly, as though the very fabric of time and space had been touched by something beyond comprehension. The scent of fresh flowers and earth mingled in the air, though no flowers grew in sight. It was as if the air itself had come alive. Mrs. Harris, trembling, took a step forward. "What is this?" Her voice barely broke through the overwhelming silence that hung in the clearing. Max, who had been waiting so patiently for this moment, walked forward with purpose, his tail still and his steps measured. The others hesitated for a moment, uncertainty clouding their thoughts. The last thing anyone had expected was this, an entrance to a place that defied all logic, all reason. Then, without warning, the golden light intensified. It wasn't blinding, but it shimmered with an almost magnetic pull, compelling them to step closer. Max, now standing at the entrance, turned back to face the group, his eyes bright with something like recognition, or perhaps even gratitude. It was as if he had been waiting his entire life for this exact moment. And now, it was finally here. Mrs. Harris, holding the key tightly in her hand, felt an inexplicable sense of peace wash over her. She didn't know why, but she knew that whatever lay beyond this archway was important, so important that Max had guarded it for so long. The dog had been more than just a companion. He had been a keeper, a silent protector of something that had been hidden away, waiting for the right people to find it. "We need to go through," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. She glanced at the others. "Whatever this is, Max is telling us it's time." Without waiting for further approval, she stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the glowing light. The others followed, each of them overcome by an overwhelming sense of curiosity, mixed with a deep, unshakable feeling that they were about to unlock something that had been concealed for generations. The moment they crossed into the light, everything around them shifted. The forest behind them seemed to fade away, and they were enveloped in a serene landscape that felt both strange and familiar. The air was crisp, the sky a deep shade of blue, and the trees, unlike any they had seen before, were tall and covered in leaves that shimmered with a soft, golden glow. It felt like stepping into another world, a hidden realm that had existed for centuries, maybe even longer. Max led the way, his steps steady as he walked toward what appeared to be a small stone structure in the distance. The structure was simple but elegant, adorned with symbols and carvings that none of them could recognize. The key, the very key that had unlocked this place, was still clutched tightly in Mrs. Harris' hand, its purpose now clear. Max stopped in front of the structure and turned to face the group. His eyes were filled with a knowing calm, as if he had fulfilled his purpose. And in that moment, they understood. Max had been the guardian, the keeper of this secret, waiting for the day when the right people would arrive, the ones who could carry the key forward. The golden light continued to shine around them, a soft glow that bathed the entire landscape in warmth and peace. They stood together at the edge of the unknown, as the door to a hidden world slowly closed behind them. Whatever lay ahead, they knew it was only the beginning of a much larger mystery, one that Max had been guarding all along. The storm drain, the key, the box, and the dog, it had all led to this moment. And now, as they looked to the future, the world seemed full of infinite possibilities, each one waiting to be discovered.